This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to From Guilt to Good, Self-Care Solutions for Busy Caregivers, the podcast rewriting the narrative of self-care. If you're a caregiver feeling stretched thin, torn between responsibilities, and longing for self-care, then you are in the right place. I'm Jeanette Yates, a fellow caregiver and someone who spent years doing all the self-care things and never feeling any better. After years of research, self-exploration, and trial and error, I finally found a way to create a sustainable self-care practice that made me feel good, not guilty. And in today's episode, I invited my lifelong friend, fellow caregiver, and licensed mental health counselor, Angela Turk, to join me in discussing one of the biggest barriers to self-care for caregivers, being able to actually listen to our own needs because of listening to the needs of others around us. This is the first of 2 episodes with Angela, and today we are going to discuss recognizing our own basic needs just as we recognize the needs of those for whom we care. Hey, Angela, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Jeanette, thanks for having me.
Okay, so we realized, of course, when we were talking before I hit record, that we have about 47 episodes that we could do on the topic of caregiving, but we're going to try to stick to 2 episodes now. But of course, I will have you on periodically because there's just so much to unpack about caregiving and how we can balance caring for ourselves and caring for others, not just our aging loved ones that we might be caring for, but most of us here in the self-caregiver nation are caring for maybe more than one parent. Maybe we have children and we're caring for our parents. And so we have a lot of responsibilities. We have jobs, we have, partners, friends. And so we have a lot of people in our lives that have needs. And of course, as caregivers, we have dedicated or stepped into the responsibility of caring for the basic needs, but not just the basic needs, but today we're going to focus on those basic needs of our loved ones. And sometimes that can be problematic in terms of taking care of our own needs. So let's dive in. First of all, can you unpack the idea of what are the basic needs?
So food, clothing, shelter, that sort of, obviously we have to take care of our basic needs before we can start feeling emotionally better, because if you're not taking care of that, you're not going to be able to be connected emotionally to yourself, to other people. It's going to be harder to build those relationships.
Yeah, so when we look at that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Yes.
Which again, that's a whole other podcast we talk about. But there are those basic things like water, food, shelter, that safety, are you going to die of being out in the elements, that kind of thing. And so those are some basic needs. And then, as we are encountering other people in our lives, we have to learn to recognize when other people need us. And so talk a little bit about recognizing when people need something from us or from anybody. They need something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So first I want to share an acronym. Just little backstory, as I've been working in addiction treatment for years and years and years.
Yes.
So one of the things we talk about in addiction treatment is in order to be able to even focus on your own recovery, you have to be able to take care of your own basic needs and identify like what's going on. So there's an acronym that we use. It's called HALT. It's hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So if you think about, like, as a parent, you know, when we have a baby, when do our babies cry? They cry when they're hungry. They cry when they're frustrated because they're trying to communicate something with you. They don't have the words, or, you know, they can't reach what they're trying to get, or they're lonely. They want to be held, or they're tired. I mean, often our babies are crying because they're overtired. Well, those same four things, the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, that doesn't go away for us as adults. We just may not be crying about it. So we may be irritable. We may do some self-sabotaging behaviors.
Right.
So that could be, you know, that could be relapse with substance abuse. It could just be being grumpy and irritable. It could mean, you know, a number of different behaviors right. that we would potentially do, or that our loved ones are doing because they have a basic need that's not being met. So it's important that we kind of look at that and make sure that we are getting enough rest, we are eating properly, we are spending enough time with our own, you know, friends and family, not just the person that we're caring for, and that we're not too frustrated with the whole process, because our behaviors may be off from that, or their behaviors may be off.
Well, I was gonna step in here and talk about this, because I have had Laura H.A.L.T on. She's a social worker, and she talked about compassion fatigue and how, you know, like sometimes you can know when you're getting close to burnout, and you're experiencing compassion fatigue, because you do have that level of frustration, which brings me back to that, like that whole, that anger, that frustration. Chances are there's something below that.
Yes.
You know, it's not that you all of a sudden become a jerk when you're not normally a jerk. It's that there is a need not being met, and you're expressing it through frustration. And chances are, I just talked to a caregiver today who was saying that, like, their loved one said something to them that was not nice. And they were like, I can't believe it. It's the worst thing. And I was like, oh, honey, sit down. Let me just tell you, because one of the things that I had to learn, and I know you've probably experienced this too, because you've had several caregiving experiences, that sometimes, like, your loved one will say something and it is like right in the gut. Like, it's, kind. It is not kind. And like, while there's a myriad reasons why that might happen, and we can unpack that, like I said, in one of the 47 other episodes we're going to do. But chances are it has nothing to do with how good of a job you're doing caregiving for them.
No, it's
even though they're telling you you're not doing a great job. Like, that's usually what they're saying. Like, you're not doing a good job caring for me.
They may be complaining about the food constantly, but the reality is they're lonely, and they're, you know, there's nothing really wrong with the food they have. They just really want more attention.
Right.
Yes.
And so those are some things to, like, you know, as you are assessing and caring for the needs of others, and they are expressing different needs, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, you know, those are the things. I almost think that, like, regardless of what they're saying, you don't stay long enough. This food is terrible, you know, whatever. or if they're in your home, like, there's other things that are happening, and you're like, which one of the halts, which one of the letters are they not giving right now? Which one of these things? And so that is a great way to approach when your loved one, especially, you know, if your loved one has dementia or any other kind of, you know, inability to communicate in what we would consider a more forthright manner. Like, I am hungry, I am angry. And so, but going back to how that relates to how we assess our own needs based on what behaviors or feelings we are exhibiting. I guess we don't really exhibit feelings, but behaviors we're exhibiting, we can go back to that same thing and say, okay, so I just, had a major case of road rage right now. That was why, I'm angry, but am I really angry at the traffic or what's really going on? So really trying to assess a deeper level of what's going on. But then how do we get back to really tapping into those basic needs? Because as you were saying, as you were talking about when you work with people who are in recovery from addiction, it's like they're not sometimes able to attend. They're like not able to attend to their basic needs, even though they might be, quote, going to work, or they might be doing some things, but they haven't slept in days, or they haven't eaten in days. And so they're trying to get to those higher level things, but they're really not doing those basic things, getting enough sleep, getting enough food. And that's kind of what happens with caregivers too, is we're doing all those doctor's appointments and all the, caring for other people. Maybe even we're showing up to work or showing up for our kids. But then we're like, oh, did we eat today? Oh, did we bathe? When's the last time we took a bath? I'm getting much better with that now that I have practiced better self-care habits. But so how do we go about making sure every day that we are attending to those basic needs?
So for some people, they may have to start with a schedule for yourself,
right?
Because if you've been reactive for so long, then you may not be able to. When you're so busy worrying about somebody else's needs, you tend to turn your own off, right? And not pay any attention to those cues. Right. So that's super important, because after a while, you forget how to even identify those cues anymore, or your body stops giving them. Right. So
that's a good point.
Yeah. So
talk more about that.
So that's another whole thing, is that sometimes you have to, just like when you have an infant and you try and feed them on a schedule and have them sleeping on a schedule and napping on a schedule and because their behavior is better when you do that. They're less cranky. They're not crying so much. Everything flows a little bit more smoothly when they're on a schedule. So we may have to do that for ourselves as adults,
right?
To make sure that we are less cranky and that we are actually feeding ourselves and taking care of ourselves and getting enough rest, because our bodies may not tell us.
Right. So what I hear you saying, this is interesting, because, one of the things I talk about in my work with caregivers is that, being self-aware is really the first step into creating a sustainable self-care lifestyle. But what you're saying is, while that may be true to sustain it long term, you may not be able to get to the self-awareness. You may have to really just okay, I'm going to eat at these times. I'm going to sleep at these times. I'm going to drink water at these times, just to be able to get to the point where you can become more self-aware, where you can tap into all that.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha.
Right. Because if your body is already lost that kind of notification ability, then you have to retrain yourself.
Right.
So,
and a lot of times that happens, I think, when your body is realizing that you're not responding to it, okay, we've sent all the signals, nothing is happening long term, then that's when the illness the disease, the pain comes, and then you're in the hospital, and then that's when you do get on a schedule because they put you on one.
Right. And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
And really, any kind of medical model type treatment, whether it's, addiction or eating disorder, or even, being in a regular medical hospital, you are getting your meds on a schedule, you are eating on a schedule, you are sleeping on a schedule. They don't ask you whether you're hungry or not, if you're ready for lunch.
Right.
It's lunchtime.
Yeah.
And it's set up that way. And just having that structure and routine really makes a difference in the body healing, and then you feeling rested and more emotionally connected to yourself, because you're getting what you need when you need it without having to ask for it. And then if you can continue to model, a schedule of sorts at home, it's really helpful.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say that, because, I did some recovery work for my own eating issues. And I remember that, there was this period of time where this whole idea of eating when you're hungry or whatever was what?
That didn't even, that was not a thing.
I couldn't, if you told someone with my particular type of disorder to eat when they were hungry, they're like, okay, no problem. Yeah. Then it's never happening. Right. And so, cause that had shut down a long time ago. Right. And so I do like the idea that, or I think that makes a lot of sense, that sometimes you almost have to jumpstart the system. You have to just do the things that and that all the charts tell you, all the medical profession tells you, and your body used to tell you, but maybe it stopped.
Right.
Because I do think self-awareness and learning to listen to your body is really pivotal and crucial in maintaining self-care. But I do hear what you're saying. And I think that's important, especially for people who are in that severe state of burnout, that they're well, I can't even listen to my body. I don't even know if it's talking to me anymore. And you're okay, yeah. And so in our next episode, we're going to dive a little bit more into some of the tools that can help us awaken, that communication with our body and that understanding, connecting a little bit more to our emotions. I'm going to have you dive a little bit deeper into that, and then maybe some tools from the therapy world that might be able to help caregivers. Because I know that for many caregivers, they may be hesitant to even think about therapy. First of all, who has the time?
Right.
But also there's a little, there's, depending on your background or your experience, you may not understand exactly what therapy can be used for, what it is, what it isn't. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper into that in our next episode. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. So I'm going to wrap up today's episode. And then next episode, we will continue our conversation with Angela and talking more about how to really listen to ourselves. Once we get that jumpstart started and we give the body what it needs, even if we can't hear what it's asking for, then we're going to move beyond that in our next episode with Angela. Thank you so much for joining me today. From Guilt to Good podcast is a proud member of the Whole Care Podcast Network. And to access additional self-care resources that help you feel good, not guilty, check out the description or the show notes for this episode. Subscribe now and join me in going from guilt to good so that you can rediscover your worth, reclaim your health, and get back to the life that you've been too busy or exhausted or too zoned out to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this show, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback really matters. We're redefining self-care for caregivers one episode at a time. And until next time, remember, you are worthy of the same care you give others.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.